All right, 8 on pylons. Let's talk about it. So our objective of today is to develop skills via this advanced ground reference maneuver to master coordination, timing, and division of attention. Now, why are the DPEs obsessed with this maneuver? Why is everyone obsessed with this maneuver? It's because it shows your skill as a pilot. You know, you have these 3 things here: coordination, timing, and division of attention that you have to master in this maneuver. And so when you can do it correctly and when you can do the 8 on pilots maneuver well, it shows absolute mastery of your aircraft and your airmanship and your ability to fly the airplane. So that's why everyone is so hyped about this maneuver. Now, let's do a quick overview of what it is. And essentially, it seems pretty straightforward, right? First, you pick 2 pylons. They're both about 0.5 to 1 nautical mile away from each other. And we're supposed to create a figure 8. And we're flying, we're doing our figure 8. That seems pretty straightforward. That doesn't seem that complicated until we introduce the concept of pivotal altitude. Now, that's what makes this maneuver so difficult. And the textbook definition of it is the altitude that changes with ground speed that allows a pilot to maintain a line of sight of a pylon at a given bank angle. So, pivotal altitude changes. That's why when you see an increase in ground speed, you see an increase in altitude. That's so we can maintain that visual reference to that pylon, and that's what makes this maneuver so difficult, because you're going to constantly change that pitch, constantly change that altitude, and you're also maintaining coordination and division of attention while you're doing it. Now, pivotal altitude has this fancy formula that we have over here. It's ground speed squared divided by 11.3 plus field elevation. And so technically, if you want to do the math and do the maneuver, you can adjust your pivotal altitude as your ground speed changes. Lucky for us, we have a student here at Skyborne that made this awesome 8 on pylon chart for us. They did all of the math for all their respective ground speeds, and they calculated the pivotal altitude for us. So now we can just pull out this chart and use it so we don't have to do mental math in the air, which is really nice. So say we have a ground speed of 95 knots. We're going to enter our maneuver at 824 MSL. Awesome. Let's talk about how to start the maneuver. So when we enter into our 8 on pylons, we want a tailwind, right? You're going to enter on the downwind for this maneuver. There are different ways that you can do that. You can use a wind vector on the PFD. Some people like to look for smokestacks. Which way is the smoke blowing? We can start in that general direction. People use water. That's hard to do. Or you can use the ATIS or the METAR at your closest airport. So one thing that I want to recommend is when you are using the wind vector on the PFD, it is hypersensitive to winds. So there will be times where the wind is changing. And when that happens, I say keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Just keep whatever wind that you initially got on your heading in that area to start the maneuver. Now, picking 2 pylons is a bit of an art form because it's really difficult to find these when you're out in the field. That's why a lot of CFIs recommend you have pylons in mind when you go into certain practice areas. I like to fly in between pylons and come back to start the maneuver, but that's very time consuming. So having that sight picture of what perfect pylons will look like will help you in the air and save you time and money, obviously. When you pick them, make sure that they're visible, that they are perpendicular to each other, because if your pylons are like this, it's going to mess up your strategy for starting this maneuver. But just make sure it's perpendicular to the wind. Fly between the 2 points if you want. And some other references you can utilize are intersections of roads. That's really good. Canals with a field next to them, so you can utilize that point in the middle. There's a lot of stuff out there, and you can actually utilize ForeFlight to kind of suss out the practice area and see where you want to do your pylons, you know. This is obviously kind of hard, but a lot of people have it marked on their ForeFlight so that when they go up to the practice area, they have their points already in mind. Next, before we enter the maneuver, we're coming in. I'm going to change the color because we're now an airplane. We're coming in for a maneuver. We're going to do peak air, right? We've picked our 2 pylons. We're getting ready. We're finding our ground speed. We're going to do peak air. We're going to do our pre-maneuver checklist: lights, recog, mixture rich, fuel pump on. Then we're going to do some clearing turns in the area. That's always to the left first and then to the right. This is all before we even start. After we do that, we're going to do our aircraft setup, which is 2350 RPMs, 95 knots on the airspeed, and we're going to have the plane trimmed out, ready to go, because once we start this maneuver, there is no change in power settings at all. So once you have it set, you can forget it. And then find an emergency landing spot. So we're very close to the ground when we do this maneuver. Sometimes 800 feet. So having something close by as an emergency landing spot is very, very important. Now, we did peak air. We're getting ready. Let's start the maneuver. We're flying the maneuver. We're coming down. We're heading towards our second pylon. Once we start to see that second pylon is about to disappear underneath our cowling, we're going to turn 45 degrees towards a midpoint. I want to say there's a midpoint. A lot of people have midpoints in mind between their 2 pylons. We're going to fly towards that midpoint and we're going to bug that heading, right? So we're going to put a heading bug on our current, it's blanking on the word. We're going to put a heading bug on our current heading so we're able to exit on that same heading as well. So we're coming in, we're entering, we're flying over our midpoint. Once we are abeam our first pylon and we see it disappearing under the wing, we're going to start that bank. We're going to start a bank, we're going to let our wing drop, and we're going to look at that pylon. Some people wait 1 or 2 seconds before they let their wing drop. But once you start your bank and you have that pylon in sight, the maneuver begins. Now, you're entering on a tailwind, so at this point of the maneuver, your ground speed is going to be at its highest, which means your altitude is going to be at its highest as well. So you're going to have your steepest bank as well because you have that wind coming in. And you're going to start. You're going to maintain that Coke bottle distance over that recog light on the airplane. And you're going to stamp that sight picture. Now, as you come into this turn, your ground speed is going to decrease, which means a lower pivotal altitude. So we're going to start slightly pushing the nose down to maintain that sight picture of that pylon. Again, stamping that Coke bottle distance over the recog light. Now, that's something I want to say real quick. A lot of people utilize the rivets of the plane or another point of the wing. And to be honest, that is a huge mistake. Don't use the rivets. Use the recog light at all times. The maneuver is so much easier if you use that sight picture, because if you use the rivets, it's a lot more difficult. Continuing on, we're going to keep that flight coming. We're going to keep that sight picture. And once that ground speed starts to increase, right, in this area, we're going to start to also pull back on the yoke slightly. And we're also going to steepen our bank angle as we approach abandoning the pylon. Now, once we go over our midpoint, we're going to see your heading bug on your 90-degree point, right? That's how you know you're doing the maneuver correctly up until this point. So once you abandon the pylon, you're going to fly straight and level for about 3 to 5 seconds, and you're going to start for that second pylon. Again, if you know the maneuver and you know the expected changes in pivotal altitude, you can make smaller corrections and you can stay ahead of the airplane, which is so important. So once you go towards your second pylon, you're going to do the same thing. You have an increase in ground speed, which means an increase in pivotal altitude, and you're going to adjust accordingly, maintaining that line of sight, flying the maneuver, expecting those changes, making small corrections, nothing too abrupt. And once you get to your midpoint, you can abandon and exit on that same heading you started at. Exit that maneuver on that entry heading. All right, so just remember, as that tailwind starts to be introduced at these points of the maneuver, you're going to have to steepen your bank once again. Moving on, maintaining line of sight is pretty simple. There are these techniques you can utilize to maintain that sight picture. So here are the pylons right here. Let's go back to red. If you are at an incorrect pivotal altitude, you're going to start seeing this. Pylons in front of you, pylons behind you, and here's how you can adjust accordingly. Now, if it is in front of you, you're going to start to reduce the bank or pitch forward. So you're going to push that nose forward to catch up to that pylon. Now, this right here tells you if your pivotal altitude is correct or not, right? If you have, if you have a line of sight of that pylon, you are at the correct pivotal altitude. So again, 2 ways to do it. Let me reiterate because I don't think I explained it clearly. You can slowly push the nose forward to catch up to the pylon. Or if you are at the correct pivotal altitude, you can slightly reduce bank and let that pylon come to you. Now, if it's behind you, you're going to add back pressure. It's behind you, you're going to pull back. Now, as you're doing that, that pylon is going to start moving forward, and you're going to have that perfect sight picture again. There are 2 ways to correct. You can use bank, but a nice simple way is using that forward and back pressure on the elevator in order to get that sight picture on there. I feel like that one was kind of sloppy, but moving on. Common errors are what I like to call keys to success. So inability to select pivotal altitude is a big one. That's why when you plan for the maneuver and you have your pylons, you can maintain a stabilized aircraft before entry and have the correct pivotal altitude. A lot of people like to rush this maneuver, so they're looking for pylons, they're stressed out, and they can't find what they want to do. So by the time they find pylons, they're behind the aircraft, they're trying to catch up, and the aircraft is completely unstabilized before they even start the maneuver. And you're setting yourself up for failure. So take your time, get ahead of the airplane, plan it before you even start it, and you'll get a perfect pylon every time. Now, excessive gain and loss of altitude, right? Again, these change as you go through the maneuver, but if you expect these changes, you can make smaller corrections and you don't have those behind the airplane moments. And that is a key to not, I guess, like sawing that yoke. You know, you don't want to go back and forth on the yoke during this maneuver. That's too abrupt. That's not okay. It should be small, precise maneuvers. Think instrument flying, you know, finesse. And then finally, utilizing your resources for entry and rollout and failure to time that bank. So bugging that 45 and coming in once you're a beam, waiting 1 or 2 seconds before you start is a big factor in your success. So utilize all the tools. Like I mentioned earlier, if you bug that initial heading, you will notice that it's on your 90-degree point when you're coming towards your second pylon. And that's how you know you've made a perfect little 8, you know. Now, at this point, I would pull my phone out and put 2 pylons out and show how that sight picture on the heading indicator would look like, but that's hard to do on an iPad. So, yeah, let me just, I don't know, how would I chair fly it? Okay, let me talk it through. So now I'm holding my compass. I have my 2 pylons on the desk. Now we're going to start the maneuver. So the first thing we're going to do is fly towards our second pylon, coming in, flying towards it. Once it's about to disappear under the wing, we're going to bank 45, bugging the heading. Cool. Now we've bugged that heading, 45 degrees, good to go. We're coming in, we're changing our ground speed. It is at its highest point at this point, so our altitude is high. As we turn and maintain that line of sight with the pylon, we're going to start decreasing our ground speed. So we're going to start decreasing our pitch and bank angle, just maintaining that Coke bottle distance. As we come around, we're going to notice that our heading indicator is on the left 90-degree point to our current heading, and that's how we know it's a perfect pylon. We do the same things on the other side. Compass is turning. We see that the heading that we started on is coming back around. Once we see it's on our current heading, we abandon and we fly away with a perfect 8 on pylon. Cool. It's good I practice. I haven't done that in a while.